Hi, and welcome to Studying the Steps, a podcast from the Magdalen House, a recovery community for alcoholic women. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. In this series, we take a deeper dive into the 12 steps as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, through discussion with an alcoholic woman active in our recovery community, and with me, your host, Kelsey Amos, a recovered alcoholic and the Next Step program manager at the Magdalen House. Their personal experience and knowledge of work in the program can give insight on how anyone can apply and practice the spiritual principles to improve their lives. Please note, the curriculum we teach through our programs at Maggie's is from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, we are not an Alcoholics Anonymous group, and we are not associated with AA. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Studying the Steps. My name is Kelsey Amos, and I'm your host. I'm excited to be here today with a wonderful woman who I just absolutely adore and admire, and she is going to be talking to us today, and I will go ahead and let her introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Heather Nolan.
Hi, Heather.
Hi. I don't know where else to introduce myself.
Do you want to give us your sobriety date, too?
Oh, I've been sober since January 21, 1997.
That's awesome. Okay, Heather, can you tell us how you first got connected here at the Magdalen House?
I first got connected with the Magdalen House because I had some friends that came over here to work here. And they asked if I would start a meeting when it was during COVID. I was like, sure. And I remember asking, I go, how long am I going to do this meeting? They go, forever and ever. And I was like, okay, cool, 6 months. And now I'm like, don't take the meeting away. I want to do it forever. Yeah. But so I've been doing that since we all got sick and had to hide in our houses.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you do these Sunday night, 7 p.m. every other week, right?
Every other week, yes.
Awesome. So if you guys want to hear Heather do a meeting, come on down. All right, so what step are we going to talk about today?
I thought you set this up. No, we're going to talk about step 12.
And for anybody who doesn't know, can you tell us what step 12 is?
Says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Awesome. So would you mind unpacking that a little bit?
But let's look at it. Let's see if we can pull it apart, right? Because we have the spiritual awakening, right? Which is one of the cool things because we were just looking at this before, and I know I can't show all these weird big books on the podcast, but that it used to be the spiritual experience. So that there's that piece, and like, what does it mean to have a spiritual awakening, right? Or what does it mean to have a spiritual experience, and why did we change that? Which I love the idea of awakening. I was thinking about that on the way over here because it's like you wake up, right? But it's really cool because I've told Kelsey this before is when you ask me to do something and I say no, it's like me saying no to an experience with God, right? Yeah. And so when I get asked to do something, I worry a lot. I have a lot of anxiety that hasn't gone away, but I channel it into I start reading a lot and I start doing a lot. So the last few weeks I've just been immersed in this carry the message thing, and I've got all these books and I've got all this stuff, and just really looking into what Bill and Bob did, you know. And so the other night, so here's the God piece of all of this, which is super cool. I had a sponsee that needed to do some inventory, and she wanted to read. So she had done some inventory. She was going to read it after the meeting. So I go to the women's meeting. We have a little meeting, and then usually there's another meeting that starts 30 minutes after. I usually wait, make sure they get in, and these two newcomer guys show up. And nobody else shows up, and we're standing there, and we're like, okay, well, we've got this inventory to do, and we're looking around, and one of the guys that had 2 weeks, he starts to get up and leave, and we're like, where are you going? And he's like, well, you need to lock up the door, don't you? And I was like, no, we need to have a meeting. And so we both sit down, and we end up having a meeting with these two people, and the thing is that probably would have happened anyway. I don't think that you asking me to do this would have happened, but the awakening, I'm now awake to it, and I'm awake to the fact, and I was telling my sponsee, I said, I'm pretty sure that Bill and Bob would rather stay here and carry the message than for you to do the inventory. We'll do it on Sunday, right?
Yes.
But that's the awake, I'm awake now, you know?
That's awesome.
It's super cool. But yeah, then we tried. I love that. We tried to carry the message. Does that mean that they're not listening? I don't know. I'm just joking. But we tried to carry this message to alcoholics, and then the last part is to practice these principles in all our affairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I
Yeah.
like the tried to carry this message too, because I don't know about you, but when I first started taking commitments to take meetings into treatment centers and things like that, it was easy for me to get caught up on like, they're not getting it, right? They're not receiving it. They're not listening to me. But like, that's not the point, right? The point is that I am trying to carry this message.
Well, there's that old story, and I don't know in which of those millions of books it's in, but the old story of like Bill when he's telling Lois, he's like, this isn't working, and he's like, nobody's staying sober, and she's like, but you're sober, like that kind of level of it. Or the other one that always sticks to me is, so Bill's in the Mayflower Hotel, right, and he looks sober and he wants to drink, right? And he goes and he starts to make these phone calls. And I'm thinking, man, if there's a bar nearby, I'm going to make like maybe 3 phone calls. Like in my mind, he calls, he gets a hold of the person, right? But that's not what happens. Like he keeps calling, he keeps calling, he keeps calling. And they say 10, but who knows? But he calls more than one, which is really cool. And I think that goes into tried too, right? Is we keep going. Like, I know that I need to work with another drunk to be sober.
Yeah. Can you tell the rest of that story?
From what I know is he ends up calling a guy, Walter Tunks. I know Tunks' his last name. I think it's Walter. He ends up getting a hold of him, who gets him a hold of Henrietta Seiberling. What she does is she ends up calling Anne. And my favorite story, whether it's real or not, when she calls Anne, which is Dr. Bob's wife, she says, this is manna from God. And there's something about that, because I don't know why that one always makes me cry, because it's like, you know what alcoholic torture's like, know, and I know what it's like from my end, and I think, as I've been sober a while, I've gotten to witness a lot of other people's too, and to get to see it from the family side. But to think, like, here's this dude that's been drinking, and he's pretty much a normal guy in all other aspects. I mean, he's a freaking proctologist, like, like it seems like you'd have to know something there, have something together, and he's drinking and he can't stop, and these people are just like praying over him, and to get this call, and I don't know, the beauty to me in that is that manna from heaven is also just this idea that Bill Wilson, who is just a drunk, like that level of mutuality, yes, if I said that right, that happened here. Like, there's no difference between me and you, or Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, or Ebby and Bill, or whatever it is, that he gets to show up like just as like human. I kind of want to say broken or screwed up, but that's not actually true. Just as human as anybody else, and he's like their angel in that sense to me. That's how I see it in my head. I don't know that's exactly what happened, but yeah, then he gets there, and Dr. Bob doesn't really want to talk to him, right? And I love once he comes home with a potted plant, and she says he's as potted as the plant, but he's like under the table or something.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, there's I think it's in Pass It On, or and he goes in there, he's not going to talk to him, and they end up having this great conversation. And you hear so many stories, I don't know what's real and what's not. Even for Ebby's story of meeting Bill, it's different than Bill's version. And Ebby's told the same story 3 times. Bill's version's a little bit different, but you hear all these stories. But in my mind, and what I have always heard, was it wasn't long after he had talked to Dr. Silkworth, and Dr. Silkworth was saying you can't bring religion to them, like they need to know what's wrong. And so he comes in with this kind of a different view on it, right? It's like we're looking at the mental and the physical, and he's able to deliver that first. And I think that a guy who's a doctor, that probably made a huge impact, as opposed to this guy that's been in the Oxford group and people have been praying over him. I don't know if he had started with the other aspect. He'd have been like that. Maybe that doesn't work for me,
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. It's cool.
That is so cool.
Nothing was supposed to happen. That's what's so neat about it is like, if you had, it really is just like a comedy of errors, And what better for a group of alcoholics, right? I understand error. Yeah.
Well, and it's cool too that, they thought that, like, Ann Smith and Bob Smith and Henrietta Seiberling, like, they all thought that Bill was like this, heaven sent man for Dr. Bob, but like, really, Bill was just trying not to drink and get out of himself and doing what he had learned how to do. And so, like, the grace was vice versa, you know? And that's a really cool deal.
Yeah, well, and isn't that the beauty of it, right? Is I don't have something to teach you. I need you
Yeah.
to be sober, right? Which is kind of different than a lot of other groups. Yeah. I always tell, when I'm working with somebody and they say I'm scared to sponsor, I'm always like, dude, like, Bill did not call Dr. Bob because he had something to teach that man. Like, he wouldn't have listened to him, right? We don't show up with like a halo on our head. We show up to stay sober another day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
So cool.
Okay, so kind of on that same note, we're getting into the history of really how the program was started, because it was all started basically on a 12th step before step 12 was even a thing, right? So can you talk about that a little more, I guess, elaborate a little more on the Bill meets, or the Ebby and Bill thing?
Ebby and the Bill story. Yeah. And for the Bill story, right, is that Ebby's in this place, and I mean, here's the cool thing. Again, just a comedy of errors, right? Ebby probably should have been in jail. So we have Roland Hazard, who is the guy who went to talk to Carl Jung, right? And that's what brought us back this spiritual kind of idea with this, right? So we're going to have this psychic change. And then Roland, it was him and a guy named Cerebra Graves and Shep Cornell, I think, and I really hope those are right. But one of them was their dad, or they had like a relative that was going to be he was supposed to be the judge over Ebby. And so because of Roland's situation, they actually released Ebby to the Oxford group, and so he goes down to live with Sam Shoemaker down in I think it's Calvary Episcopal Church. And so Ebby should be put away. Roland should be dead. I mean, let's face it, he's been to Dr. Young twice. And yet here we are. And part of the Oxford group is I think they called it more of a testimony, but part of the Oxford group was to give a testimony. Well, Ebby's down in New York. He knows Bill from before, which Bill mentions that, and he's got to go and carry this message. So, I mean, we didn't make up this whole idea ourselves. So he shows up and he has this message. And here's the thing, you're just talking about the tried, right? Because Bill doesn't get sober right after the message. Like, he still drinks again. He goes back, but he has that seed that's planted in that message that's carried. And, that idea that there is a spiritual solution.
Are you or someone you know struggling with the inability to stop drinking? At the Magdalen House, we believe that alcoholic women deserve a place to recover with dignity. In our 2-week residential program, clients will be introduced to what alcoholism is and what alcoholism isn't, as well as be presented with the solution, all in a loving and supportive environment. All of our programs are at absolutely no cost, and because we accept no government money, we can accept women all over the world and stick to our own curriculum. If you want to stop drinking and cannot, call 214-324-9261 for a phone screen.
So, has Step 12 changed since the Big Book was first written?
Absolutely. We just went through that. Yes. First printing, right, is we have this having had a spiritual experience. The spiritual experience, a lot of people got confused, thinking that we were going to have this white light kind of conversion experience that Bill talks about. That was not my experience. I do know some people that have had that experience, but mine's more of the one described in the back of the book. So they added this appendix that talks about that educational variety. Right. Yeah. And, because I think for a lot of us, here's the amazing miracle of it is neither one of us should be sober right now. Yeah. Like, there was a period of time that wasn't possible. And I think that's one of the things that I remember when newcomers come in is because I didn't believe in this program when I came in here. But, like, I believe in it now because I am just completely blown away by the fact that I don't have to drink today.
Yeah.
I
think, what was it you said when I heard you tell your story? Mm-hmm. You said you came in and you're like, okay, I'll try it for a year and then I'll leave. Mm-hmm. And you haven't left.
I haven't left. I actually only gave it 6 months, but yeah.
Okay, 6
yeah,
months.
but I haven't left. Yeah, and I, and trying it for a year means doing all aspects of it, though. I think that's the difference, But
and you had a spiritual awakening.
I had a spiritual awakening, and again, to go back to, I love the fact that it's not that my higher power wasn't here. It's that I wake up to it, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're what is it? Where Silkworth says, "Perhaps you scoff, but you may remain to pray."
Yeah.
Right. Like, just that idea of, like, it wasn't that, like, there was no God in my life. It's just that through doing the steps, you wake up to it. You start to see the beauty in the world that already, like, it just sucked before. And you wake up and you're like, oh, that's a cool sunset. Oh my gosh. You all of a sudden become aware of it. So the experience, we changed spiritual experience, and then we changed in the first edition. Second printing is when we changed that, and we added that appendix, but then we also changed these to those. And so we were looking at that earlier, because I have a second edition second printing and a second edition 13th printing, and in between the two, it changed from those back to these, which is what we know as. I did research that for you, so you have an answer.
So just to elaborate, we're talking about on page 59, where it lays out all 12 steps, and it says, for step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps in one version, and then changing it to as a result of these steps in another version.
Correct.
And you know why?
I do, or at least I know what the belief system is behind it. This was from writing the big book, so it's his belief, not mine, if you don't like it. But it makes sense to me, though, is that when they I don't know why he put it to those the first time, but what I do know is that he changed it back to these because people saw the first, having had a spiritual awakening as the first 11, because it was those steps, and then I'm carrying the message. But then that goes back to I'm teaching you, right? As opposed to when we have it as these, it includes step 12. So I'm having that spiritual awakening through all of these steps. Right. And I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if you work with another alcoholic, like, you get it so much more when you're working with somebody else than I ever got it, like, when I was doing it the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the spiritual awakening. So that is why, and it's been changed since sometime in the second edition. I don't know which printing. Yeah.
So I think it's cool that they changed the word to really make it better, make it more applicable and understandable, but still the way that we work step 12 has remained unchanged, correct? And, like, we carry the message and we practice these principles.
Yeah. Well, practicing the principles is a whole nother ball game, isn't it?
Sometimes that's the harder part.
Absolutely. But I do think, I think practicing the principles is a message. I always tell this story, and this is probably going to tell you way too much about me. I was working in a place, and I was very adamantly against what they were doing. And I was on a war path, right? And I still think I'm right. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm right. But the way I showed up was wrong, and I remember a friend of mine telling me, they said, if you were the only example I saw of this program, I would want nothing to do with it, which was soul crushing. But I think that is part of the message I carry, right? Is like, if I'm a jerk out there to the rest of the world, then am I carrying the message? Or am I practicing these principles? I always say, like, I can show up real good in a meeting for an hour, but if I go home and yell at my kids, like, what principles am I really carrying to them? Yeah.
And if you're the only example of recovery that someone is seeing,
Yeah, that's a scary one. I always wanted to put a little symbol on the back of my car that I was in recovery, but I'm not sure I drive like I'm in recovery all the time. It's still one that I'm working on. But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so.
Like, do you drive well enough to tell everyone in the world that you're in the program?
Probably not. Probably not.
Well, let's talk more, because we've talked about the history, and I love the history. It's this beautiful kind of ripple effect, right? And that just makes me a little teary-eyed, because I just think it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And all of this if we didn't have step 12, none of this would happen, right? Because, well, Bill probably wouldn't have stayed sober.
True. There is that. Yeah.
But it's all like as a result, like because somebody was doing a solid 12th step, I get to be here today.
Right. Right.
And that's a really cool deal.
Yeah.
So to kind of take it back to your experience, like what has been your experience with step 12?
Oh, man. Well, first, before I even go into that, what you just reminded me of, and this is just, it's that Dr. Bob thing where he gives those numbers, right? Where he talked about, like, I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons: sense of duty, pleasure. This is the one that gets me, because in doing so, I'm paying my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And because every time I do it, I take a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. But I mean, just before I go into that, like the debt that we owe, look, I'm going to get teary-eyed too. The debt that we owe for those people that took us through the steps. Like the person that sat down and read this book with me and taught me how to work these steps, like they changed my entire course of life, right?
Yeah.
And they changed my life for my family. They changed my life for my kids. They changed, and hopefully they changed the life of some other people, because that is that ripple effect, right? That we get to carry that message. And, I would love to say that the people I worked with, that I helped and did so much, but my experience with step 12 is how much they've done for me, right? Which I guess that is the whole point, right? But it seems a little selfish. I don't know. There's something about the presence of God that happens in the space between two people. I don't know a lot about God, which is really cool, because I think that's what the program taught me. I think I thought I knew more than I do today. I realize I know less, and I'm okay with not knowing, just like I'm okay with not having the exact story anymore. But what I do know is that it shows up in space. It shows up in the space of, like, when I get to work with you, or like when we're getting to sit here and we're both sharing this experience of these women working with us. And you can't see it on the podcast, but the fact that the both of us are tearing up and here is this God space, right? And I can feel it. Yeah. That's been such a cool thing about the 12 steps, is that I get to go from concept to consciousness. I get to go from the idea to the feeling, and the consciousness and the feeling of it is beyond words. Like when something's just so pretty, you can't do anything but cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the experience I get to have because of this program. I think I've had that experience. I can promise you I've had that experience a heck of a lot more working with a newcomer than I have writing inventory, right? Or making amends, all of that was necessary. I think all of that's necessary to remove those blocks so that I can be awakened to that God between us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that is beautiful.
It is. I don't know where it came from.
No, I love that.
So, like, in every piece of this book and in every piece of this program, right? Mm-hmm. Selfish and self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, like in every piece of this program, it's all about giving back. And I know my sponsor used to tell me, she goes, I don't care if you get sober and happy and you sit in your room. Like, what's the point of that? Like,
exactly.
Yeah. Like this type of stuff is not the stuff you soak up with a sponge. This is the type of stuff that you give out. Yeah. Cool stuff. Anyway.
It is so cool. How has working step 12 evolved in your experience? Does it look different today than it did when you first started sponsoring and carrying the message?
Absolutely. Because first I was scared to death, right? Like, if we want to go to the basic, I was scared to death, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was calling my sponsor every 5 minutes. I was going, she wants to do this now. And my sponsor's like, yeah, we did that. And I'm like, I don't remember. I was still very just befogged and jittery. But because I talked like that back in 1997. But yeah, there's some level of that. I always go back to, it's on like page 96 of like not chasing that person, and and I'm totally just paraphrase that, but there is that too, right? Is like there's error in all of it, and that goes back to, that's the beauty of the program, right? Is I don't do it perfect. I'm never going to do it perfect. And so, yeah, there's been times where, like, I'm chasing people down going, you're going to get sober, you know? There's been times where I just didn't know what the heck I was doing, and I was scared to death. And there's been times that I have probably or definitely been more judgmental and less loving. You know, I think as we grow in the program, we start to see different character defects, you know? And my sponsees, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, get to help me with those defects, right? It's that mutuality of the whole situation. I think today, right now, and I always say right now because it's probably going to change. You know, that's what it is to grow along spiritual lines. But I think today, more so than I was at the beginning, I realize that it really is between them and God. And sometimes I think I'm just kind of walking next to them until they're ready to take off on their own, right? Yeah. But I'm not really doing anything. I mean, I know that sounds weird. I know we're talking about the steps and that kind of stuff, but I'm not doing it. I'm just kind of showing them where it's at. And I think for a period of time, I thought of sponsorship, and I'm talking about sponsorships. There's actually other ways that carry the message, H&I and different things, but I think for a while there was a lot of pride and ego in that, right? Is that they had to get sober, and I had to have these sponsees, and I had to have so many of them, and they all were going to be carrying the message, and we were just going to be like a little missionary group, you know, or whatever it is we're going to, you know. Yeah. You know, I don't know God's plan. I don't know the relationship between God and another person. What I do know is I know what these steps are because somebody showed them to me, and I know I have a reference, and I know I have a community of people that, you know, one of the beautiful things that I've learned in this program is I don't reinvent anything. You know, and that's been for everything. Like, I'm not joking. Like, you guys have helped me raise my kids. You guys have helped me, like, here's a great example. The other night, my son got ink on his shirt. I literally go up to my group and I'm like, okay, which lady in here knows how to remove ink from a shirt? And they're like, oh yeah, you just, you know, but like just little things like that. Like, you guys taught me how to live, you know. I'm going to ramble, but, you know, I got here really, really young. You guys don't know, but I was like 12. No, that's what I always tell people. But I was young. I was 18, and I walk into this room, and all I want to do is to not do what I was doing. You know what I mean? Like, that was it. I didn't want a new life. I didn't want to change who I am. I don't want to grow along spiritual lines and look at character defects and all this other kind. I don't want to talk to you people. You know, but you guys raised me, you know, and I'm always a little baffled because my entire adult life has been in this program, and which is a little weird, but there's a little bit of insanity that goes with that. But we were talking today, you know, there's a new group of young people in our meetings, and young people are not the easiest people to deal with sometimes. You know, we're I can't say we anymore. They, they're young, they're immature, they, you know, they're still young, and there's been some people have come to me and have been like, oh my gosh, there's young people. They're like on their phones and they're talking and they're making loud noises outside the meeting. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, that was me, you know? And all I can say is, you know, thank God I was still welcomed. Yeah. Thank God there were people there that had the patience and the love and the tolerance to let, like, I didn't come in looking great. I'd have my head shaved and like 11 piercings in my face. And I was mad, you know, and my hygiene wasn't the best, like, you know, but like these people opened the door for me, and they did tell me little slogans and held my hand and told me to come back as the only place that was still telling me to come back, right? Yeah. And those people carried the message. You know what I mean? They were practicing the principles. They were carrying the message.
What would you say to a woman who has just been cleared to sponsor by her sponsor and she is scared to?
I mean, I'll tell you what I tell mine. It's the same thing. I mean, it's going to be a reiteration is that Bill didn't call Dr. Bob because he had a message that he had it all together, right? Bill calls Dr. Bob because he wants to drink. And, that's that, thing. I'm pulling open the book right now. But, I would look at this first page of Working with Others, where it says, practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. I don't carry the message because I'm all high and mighty and, I know something. I carry the message because I don't want to drink again.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that's cool about that, too. And I always say this when I get to do one of the groups at Maggie's, is that I get more out of it than they do. And I know they're probably like, oh, yeah, that's whatever. But it's true. Yeah. It's true. And, there's some nights that it's late. You know what I mean? Like, I've worked all day, I've gone to a meeting, I've fed my kids, and I've got a sponsee, and she wants to meet. And I'm going to tell you, my first thought is, oh, God, I'm tired. I'm not, I'm not perfect here. And then I meet with them, and the spiritual energy comes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know where it comes from, and I'm elated after it happens. So, and I think that's one of those things, right? Repetition strengthens and confirms. It's one of those things that I just have to do a lot to get that experience, to know, like, God gives me that energy. Yeah. Like in the space between me and you, when God gets to show up, it ends up just being a beautiful thing, and I don't want to miss it.
Me neither. All right. So for my last question, and thank you again for doing
You're
this.
welcome.
And
I love this.
Thank you for being a part of our community and one of our meeting chairs. And it's just really cool to have you here. And I don't think I would know you otherwise. So that's a pretty cool deal. If y'all can't tell, I love Heather. So what would you want someone listening to know about Maggie's?
What I would say strikes me most about Maggie's is that there's a love. There's a love in the air. And, even when I started doing it over, because I had visited Maggie's before, I was really involved in the old location. And when I went to do the COVID version of the meeting, and I remember thinking, it's not going to be the same. I'm not going to feel it. And, it comes up on the screen. Everybody came up, and I see all these smiling faces, and I see all these women there. And the presence was there. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And again, I don't know that I have the right words for it. I think, if you haven't been to Maggie's, you just need to come and experience it, right? God's a lot better experience than it is read about.
That's beautiful. I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, like I said, Heather is one of our meeting chairs. She does our 7 p.m. meeting every other Sunday night. So hopefully you guys can come and check it out. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Studying the Steps series podcast, hosted by Kelsey Amos and brought to you by the Magdalen House. I am Bryn Hansen, host of our Recovered Interviews with Alcoholic Women series. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new release from one of our 4 series. To learn more about the Magdalen House and the services we offer, visit magdalenhouse.org or follow us on your favorite social media channels.